let's go ahead and get started. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Dr. Kareem Watson. He is Chief Engagement Officer with NIH All of Us Research Program at the National Institutes of Health. He leads the All of Us Research Program efforts to foster relationships with participants, communities, researchers, and providers across the United States and territories through equitable engagement to help build one of the largest and most diverse health data sets of its kind to advance precision medicine research. Prior to joining the NIH, Dr. Watson spent over 15 years conducting cancer disparities research. He completed his postdoc training in Cancer Center leadership under Dr. Robert Wynn at the University of Illinois Chicago Cancer Center, and went on to become an independent funded researcher with funding from the NCI, NIMHD, and NILHLBI. Dr. Watson's work spans across community-engaged research, CBPR, and implementation and dissemination science, including engaging community members as citizen scientists to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion in clinical trials. In addition to his research, Dr. Watson also served as a healthcare administrator, overseeing community-based research and serving as an associate executive director for a network of federally qualified health centers. Dr. Watson has been recognized by many organizations for his commitment to training and education, including being awarded an Innovator in STEM Award by the Chicago Urban League. And today, Dr. Watson will be talking to us about unveiling the potential of the NIH All of Us Research Program for Occupational Therapy, a community-engaged approach to addressing disability health disparities.
Good morning. Can y'all hear me okay? Great. Excited to be here today, and I'm going to make sure I spend some time too for allowing time for question and answer. It's really excited to be here, and I was telling Susan I want to start with how we met actually, and it was a story of equity and inclusion and a reminder. At the time we had a NCI grant. We had just got awarded this big grant from the National Cancer Institute, the NCI. And it was one of those big U54 grants that have a lot of research projects in them. One of the research projects that I was really excited about was actually a project being led by Susan. But as often happens, particularly in this current budget climate, there was about a 25 to 26% or so reduction in the budget, in the grant across the board. So we had the bright idea to say, to make this fair, we're just gonna cut all the projects by 25%, all of them. That's the fair thing to do. That's the right thing to do because these projects, every project has merit, scientific merit, has gone through a rigorous review process. And I was really excited about this project because I had the opportunity to guest lecture and attend some of Susan's classes where I actually had saw firsthand the intersection of what could happen when persons living with disability come for a mammogram screening, something as simple as a mammogram screening that is not simple. Right? The discrimination that they faced even at the registration desk, the discrimination they face even in getting an appointment, right? And then no one asking about accommodation. So I knew this going in. I have many intersecting identities myself. And you know, I'm a cancer disparities researcher and I'm a card-carrying CBPR researcher, community-based participatory research. But I was about to do trauma unintentionally to appear by what I thought was a simple budget cut, what I thought was a fair budget cut. And when I got the call, and ultimately office visit from Susan that says, Kareem, this is the 20% budget cut for my project that is already barely appropriately funded, would mean that certain persons living with disability in the work that we're trying to do, there's certain accommodations we need, certain devices that we need in this study that other studies can get away with not having. You can get away with having convening on this campus place, but I can't get away with just having a convening anywhere because there's certain things I have to think about in the population that I engage in my research. And it was one of those aha moments for me to understand that just like we do community engagement, we have to do precision engagement. And that there's not a one-size-fits-all way to address inequities. And so I start off with that, A, as a thank you, and then as a reminder that we have to always think, and it's really interesting for me because I'm a glass half full type of person. I was raised to really always to assume that there's a solution everywhere. But I've learned in equitable research, you almost have to assume that inequities, and you almost have to commit to the fact that when conducting research within an environment, especially in a federal environment, that systemic inequities will play a role. And by starting off with that acknowledgement and that intentionality, that helped me and has helped me throughout my career understand how to do precision engagement, understanding how each unique population that you're engaging may have different needs. So I start off with that story just to ground it, A, in appreciation, and to ground it in an acknowledgement that I think we all have that opportunity to think about where do those inequities sit when we're in a place of privilege and seemingly power, and how may we unintentionally be part of the problem. You know, we may see it in our classrooms with our students, we may see it in the research grants that we do, and the way I approach my work is nothing about us without us, right? I even had a project with some African American cancer survivors. Some men, they wanted to call it FUBU, and I had to break it to them. I was like, that's already been trademarked. I get it, for us, by us, I get it, but I can't write a grant for FUBU and have Damon Dash and others coming after me because I stole their title. But again, I ground my work in that story, and I bring that lived experience, and I thank you for that opportunity. So now I'm going to switch to the reason why I'm really here. Talk to you about the All of Us, the National Institutes of Health All of Us research program, and the role that I feel that we're playing in even in occupational therapy research and other research associated with persons living with disability, and a community engaged approach to addressing disability health disparities. I do not have any relationships to report within the last 24 months with defined and eligible companies. I will not be discussing unlabeled investigational use of medical devices or pharmaceutical devices during this presentation, and I have no other disclosures. I hope one day I will be able to put this slide up and I have a list of disclosures for some investments or something, but right now I don't. So today I hope to identify the All of Us research program data set as a robust resource for identifying and addressing health disparities within the disability community. And also to think about conceptualizing the application of community-engaged research frameworks to occupational therapy inquiries focused on disability populations. And explore innovative methodologies for integrating community-engaged research and large-scale data set analysis to inform occupational therapy practice and policy. One of the things that I often try to elevate in this space, particularly of community engagement, is that community engagement is a rigorous science. It is an evidence-based science. It is not an afterthought. It is not just putting together a community advisory board. It's not just having a steering committee. It's way beyond checking a box. It is actually a benchmark to say that there has to be measures in place to say that we are doing equitable, inclusive, and intentional community engagement, and that we've thought about these processes early on in the planning of the grant, and that we've appropriately resourced for that community engagement to take place. I think about the fact that when you think about some work that I was doing, I often get called in to give consults as a community engaged scientist, and they call me in after the grant has been funded, after the specific aims have been written, and I said, so you brought me in to talk about your next grant? Because you didn't bring me in to talk about this one, because this one's already done. This is baked, and so you're doing community pass-through research. You're not doing community engaged research. And when I used that term, community pass-through research, with a colleague, they were not happy. But I had to let them know, if you needed a certain lab equipment in a research project, would you wait till the grant was done and then go find out how much that lab equipment costs and then try to put it in the back? No. But we want to bring people who actually have the very lived experiences that we are examining to the table. We think about that later and as an afterthought, or something nice to do and not something that must be done. So what I've tried to do, particularly in my role at the NIH as the Chief Engagement Officer, is elevate the role of community engagement as a rigorous science and provide peers and colleagues with some actual tools that they can use to scale and implement in their research. All of us. You've heard this term, you're like, okay, what is all of us? all of us is really, our goal is in our name. It's all of us. All of us is the NIH's largest effort in precision medicine research. It's really acknowledging the fact that genomics research, DNA research, genetic research has unfortunately sometimes taken a one-size-fits-all approach, which is totally contrary to what the purpose of precision medicine is to really understand how our unique genetic and genomic makeup, our unique ancestry and unique makeup that we have both inside and outside in our lived environment, how that can inform disease. We know now that there are people who are living with cancer who are taking chemotherapies, where those chemotherapies have been informed by a person's ability to respond to a certain gene, a person's ability to respond to a certain treatment. And just by being able to have access to that innovative care, that can change the game. But one of the things we also know is that one of the reasons for a lot of the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a lot of clinical trials is research design. Many studies are designed from the onset to unintentionally exclude populations. I was doing a research study on nutrition. I mean, we were talking about a research study on nutrition and public health associated with our data set. And I was going through the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And when I went through those, there was some diabetes ranges and some blood pressure control ranges. And I was like, you've just excluded the majority of our participants who receive their care at federally qualified health centers. Because unfortunately, we are fortunate to have FQHCs in our enrollment and engagement sites. However, what that does in a good way, it brings populations who live and carry the greatest burden of disease, it brings those populations to the research space. So designing a research study without thinking about are my inclusion criteria unintentionally excluding a whole population is how those systemic barriers show up even in the onset of research. So we talk about the design, and all of us is inclusive in that. Right now, in order to enroll, you simply have to be 18 years or older and able to provide informed consent in English and or Spanish. Already some barriers because we know that there's many of our populations who engage in the healthcare system beyond the languages of English and Spanish, so we have more work to do. And the other thing is that we're setting out to enroll 1 million or more people. And unlike some research studies where you're trying to see is drug A different than drug B, or is intervention A better than intervention B, all of us is setting out to collect data. To collect and various types of data. Data that tells us about ancestry, genetics, survey data, social determinants of health data, access to electronic health record data. And even in the future, some opportunities to look at things like eye scans and nutrition profiles, gut microbiome, and other things. And to be able to make that data readily available to researchers so that they can ask questions that we have not been able to ask before. One of the things, and our goal is to engage 1 million or more people. And today, where are we? We have over 840,000 participants who have begun their journey with us. We have biosamples from over 500,000 participants, almost 600,000. 570,000 plus participants have completed the initial steps of the program. And we have electronic health records from over 453,000 participants. And this data is going to allow us to fill some critical gaps in research and to address some historic problems. I'll tell a quick story, two stories, one about when medicine was not precise for my own family. So my oldest brother was a kidney transplant recipient. And he also then, after his first kidney transplant, he had his first bout of colorectal cancer. He was able to go through a successful first treatment with that colon cancer, but then he had a second bout of colon cancer after his second kidney transplant. I remember having a conversation with my brother's oncologist who was treating his cancer and his nephrologist who was treating his kidney disease, and the lack of integration of those two partners talking about how can we make medicine precise for my brother. There was not an issue of insurance. My brother had private insurance. There was not an issue of health literacy. My brother was trained as an educated social worker who did this work, even served as a police officer for a period of time. So it wasn't an issue of access for the most part. It wasn't even an issue of health literacy. It was literally an issue that medicine was not precise for my brother. And the discussions were moving slower than the cancer. And my brother ended up succumbing to dying from complications of colorectal cancer and chronic kidney disease before the age of 60, leaving my nephews without a father. And now when I think about precision medicine, I think about the fact that because of our research data set and the diversity and size of it, we now know that many African Americans, about 30% or about 24 to 30% of African Americans with chronic kidney disease have a mutation in a gene APO1. And better understanding the mutation in that chronic kidney disease can allow us to develop screening programs where my nephews in the future can know, am I at risk for chronic kidney disease, and what can I do from a diet, lifestyle, and even a preventative measure to do this. But we wouldn't have understandings of these types of mutations without having data sets like the All of Us research data set. And then I remember I'm a cancer disparities researcher, and my work primarily set around screening cancer prevention and control in minoritized populations with people who were designated born male at birth. And when I work with those populations, particularly African American men, I often had difficulty getting data sets that were large enough, data sets that would allow me to power the studies to do the work that I did. And so my work often took twice as long as my peers, which meant that my promotion and tenure took twice as long. My publications took twice as long. Just by working with a population in which there was not data on, it put me in a place of inequity, even in my advancement as a scholar. And so when I looked at, so I was working on an R01 that I eventually ended up getting, but I looked at the All of Us data set and said, if I would have had access to the All of Us data set when I was writing my R01, could I have done this research project sooner? And I could have, because I could have told a really important story about African American men who are tobacco users, looking at their EHR to see if they were age eligible and risk eligible for getting screened for lung cancer, and to see if there was a screening record in that EHR. That is I could have used our data set to tell that story. And in that section of the grant where you write about the past, the data that got you to the new idea, I could have told that story better. But instead I had to spend years collecting that data, going through different data sets, because there was not one place where that data set existed for populations that I was conducting my research in. So where have we, you saw that we've been able to enroll a large population to date, but unfortunately, historically, genomic medicine and genomic research has predominantly been done on only about 6% of the population that is diverse. And historically, genomic medicine research is in large data sets like the UK Biobank that includes genetic and other information, have historically included 94% European populations, European participants. So that means that discoveries, risk scores, and other things that are amazing are happening and are not generalizable always to the populations who carry the greatest burden of disease. But through intentional community engagement and appropriately resource community engagement, and thinking about site selection even, thinking about where we conduct the research matters. There was recently a study that showed that some of the lack of inclusion of diverse populations in clinical research, it's not always based on historic medical mistrust. Historic medical mistrust is a real thing. The United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male was a real thing. And I say the full name of that study, and I don't call it the Tuskegee experiment, because A, the residents of Tuskegee said, we don't like it when you call it the Tuskegee experiment. The residents of Tuskegee said, we didn't ask for that study. And they also said, by calling it the Tuskegee experiment, you put the onus on us. And you also don't tell the full story of the story. When you say the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male, you tell the history of that story. And so imagine me going into Macon County, Alabama, to talk about enrolling in a precision medicine study, and I don't acknowledge the trauma that has happened. I don't acknowledge that my parents are from the South, and it was a very real memory that they had when research was done to them and not for them. So we have to be intentional in our site selection even. And as a result of us conducting research in places and spaces where it's typically not conducted, one of the largest growing reasons for the lack of diversity in clinical trial is that people are not asked. That rings true for a lot of the research that you do with persons living with disability. Not even being included, not even being seen, or not even being asked, because you assume that there's an assumption made, a wrong assumption that is made about whether or not this person will be able to participate. And so we've been very intentional about combating that. And to date, we have over 47% of those 600,000 plus participants who self-identify as being from a racial or ethnic minoritized population. And another thing that's so important about our data set in self-identified race ethnicity, acknowledging that race and ethnicity is a social construct, but the importance of the social construct, that social construct plays in the context of how we live and how we engage with the healthcare system. Within the race and ethnicity self-identified category, you also get the opportunity to do subcategories, because we know even within a Black or African American group, we're not a monolith. So you can drop down and say, am I Jamaican? Am I Ethiopian? Am I from West African or East African descent? Am I Puerto Rican? Am I Afro-Latina? Because those particular contexts matter. Same with our Asian American community. We have a lot of hidden health disparities in the Asian American community because we've aggregated and lumped that data together. And when we begin to disaggregate, break that data apart, I've seen some data that shows disparities in Vietnamese women that looks very similar in breast cancer, that looks very similar to disparities in African American women. But when we lump all that data together, it looks like Asian American women don't have a disparity for breast cancer. So when you aggregate data, you can sometimes hide disparities. We do the same for the persons living with disability in the community that you work with often, because we aggregate that data and we treat populations as if they are a monolith, as if we don't have these many intersecting identities to our existence. So we address that head on. 47.6% of our participants self-identify as racial, ethnic, minoritized populations. 28% of our participants say they have inadequate access to health care. And many of them have enrolled from a healthcare entity, but they're still saying, even though I'm in this system, the system is not really there for me. Also, we know that typically research studies are a younger, healthier, oftentimes white male population. Over 1 in 4 of our participants are over the age of 65. Over 60% of our participants self-identify as being female at birth. That is an amazing step forward for the inclusion of people who identify as female at birth for research. We also have the largest secondary data set for sexual and gender minorities. This is something that I was both excited about and saddened by, because what it showed me is that research is so behind in including sexual and gender minorities in data sets that we have the largest secondary data set. Great for us, not that great for research. Also rurality, knowing that populations that live in rural communities don't have access to clinical trials. Over 7.8% of our participants have access from rural communities. And even we ask questions. One of our major partners that you'll hear about today that we work with in our community engagement, one of our national community engagement partners, funded with the appropriate resources, well, the resource, I shouldn't say appropriate, but with resources to do this work, is the American Association on Health and Disability. They've been working side by side with us to make sure that our study is inclusive. And that is why we see about 1 in 5 of our participants are persons who say they're living with a disability. And when you break that down, we also important to break that down by over the 142,000 participants, and out of 765 participants, 142,000 participants completed the survey saying, I am a person living with disability. And 79.56 of them fall under another UBR category, underrepresented in biomedical research. Again, allowing for our data set to be used to look at that intersectionality. Of those 142,000 participants, 19,000 self-identify as being Black or African American. Another 19,000 self-identify as being Hispanic or Latino. Imagine the use of this data set for a PhD or a doctoral student, really trying to tell the story and understand the discrimination and health disparities that certain populations deal with when they're intersecting identities. Those are the things that we want the All of Us data set to be used for. And prioritizing intersectionality and social determinants of health, the All of Us Basics and Overall Health Survey. We have survey questions include participants' abilities to perform daily life activities such as dressing, walking, climbing stairs, concentrating, and making decisions. And out of the 413,000 participants who answered this study, because of a physical, mental, or emotional condition, do you have difficulty doing errands alone, such as visiting a physician's office or shopping? You see the answer response there. Another overall health survey, the answers there. In general, please rate how well you carry out your usual social roles. So imagine, again, having access to this data and being able to look at this data to see, does someone else have a risk factor for breast cancer? Do they have a BRCA1 or BRCA mutation? And if you do, you can begin to tell the story and understand what populations may be impacted by disease. We even have some amazing scholars using AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to develop algorithms to understand what populations may be at greater risk for chronic pain. What population may be at greater risk for receiving discrimination because they're living with chronic pain? Think about the sickle cell disease population, and they're engaging with the emergency room clinic, and how they're often turned away for opioid or pain seeking when they're just really there trying to alleviate the crisis, literally, that they're in. So our social determinants of health survey, one of my mentors in my training, in addition to Dr. Nguyen, was a researcher, Dr. Consuelo Wilkins, out of Meharry Vanderbilt. One of the things that Dr. Wilkins pressed in me as I was going through my training was true community engagement means that you will do something different. The community will inform for you to do that research differently. And there has to be a barometer to say, as a result of me engaging communities or partners or organizations, what am I doing differently? Because one of the things that we say, even though we are a cohort building study, I have to be really clear that my job is not solely recruiting. There is a distinct difference between recruitment for a clinical trial and engagement. A distinct difference, because sometimes effective engagement may not lead to enrollment or recruitment, because that effective engagement may just need to educate someone about clinical trials or talk to them about the risk and benefits, because your engagement with them may be the first time that they've heard about clinical trial. So we make it very clear. So our social determinants of health survey is a 27-measure survey that was informed by our participants and some partners. We originally didn't have questions about spirituality on our social determinants of health survey, but some of our participants, partners, and organizations came back and said, you need to ask about spirituality, not religion, but spirituality in someone's engagement with the healthcare system. They also said your question on discrimination is not as robust as it needs to be. You need to change this question. This QR code right there, if you scan and have the abilities, it can show you actually all the 27 questions, and you can download this survey as a PDF and think about even utilizing it in your own research. And some of the questions include, so more than 78,000 participants with disabilities living with disabilities have completed the survey. And questions like these: how often do you have someone to help you if you are confined to a bed? How often do you have someone to take you to the doctor if you need it? How often do you have someone to prepare your meals if you are unable to do it yourself? How often do you have someone to help you with daily chores if you were sick? And we are hoping, again, that researchers are able to use this information and couple it with other data that you may have to truly be able to tell the stories about the inequities that many populations deal with. And you'll see some of the other things. We talk about stress, access to food, neighborhood access, even neighborhood to safe environments, walkable or mobile environments. Again, those questions are asked, and they were directly informed by our participant partners. So now I'm going to switch to talking about some of the research that is actively going on within our data sets. So this is a search that I did live today. I went in our research workbench, and it's a public workbench, and I did a search by the term disability. And I found 11 projects that are actively underway. Particularly project number 1 was important because I know, as you talked about yesterday being Mental Health Awareness Day, one of the studies is looking at disability and mental illness in the LGBTQ community. The purpose of this research study is to describe the prevalence of disabilities among the LGBTQ community and to assess if and to what extent there's a relationship between disability, mental illness, and substance use within this community. Another research study is looking at representation of participants living with disability in the All of Us research program and giving some quantifiable data sets. Another project is looking at disability in place. The scientific question that it's using is, the built environment has broad implications for a community's health and social well-being, particularly for those with disability. The built environment has contributed to negative health outcomes for Black and Latino residents, people in rural and low-income communities. However, there's limited work on how the built environment affects the health experiences of people living with disabilities within each of these health disparity populations. People living with disability are the minoritized group in the U.S. with the largest health disparities, and they are overrepresented among each of these in health disparity populations. And this is the scientific question which you'll see there, and again, which you can go on our data set and find these questions. Another project, I had a former student that has just completed their DPT, Doctorate in Physical Therapy, and wanted to know, Kareem, I don't think your data set has anything in there for me. I actually said, actually it does. I said, I was really excited to find out this physical therapy and comorbidity analysis, where they're looking at physical therapists commonly provide rehabilitation services to patient populations who have complex and co-occurring chronic disease that influence rehabilitation outcomes. And the prevalence of these chronic and comorbid conditions like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease within the physical therapy practice is understudied. So again, having access to this data set is even helping our students and researchers in the physical therapy space as well. Now, I talked about this amazing work that we've been able to do, but we would not be able to do this work without our robust ecosystem of community partners. We were one of the first programs at the NIH to actually have the role of Chief Engagement Officer. We actually were one of the first programs too, even prior to SEAL and other RADx and other COVID initiatives, to actually, and even the Compass or Common Fund, to actually directly fund community as partners to do this work. We have over 19 partners, community engaged research partners, what you call our national community engagement partners. And if you look at the logos of these organizations here, you will see that many of them, the majority of them, serve populations who've been historically underrepresented in biomedical research. ACES is one of our partners, the American Indian Society of Science and Education Society, thinking about how do we engage the American Indian Alaska Native community in a research engagement perspective. All of Us Wisconsin is helping us think about some working with rural populations. Asian Health Coalition is a major partner, helping us to even think about our language expansion. Partnerships with DREF, the Delta Research Education Foundation. The Delta Sigma Theta sorority is the second oldest African American sorority in the country. And we have a partnership with the larger Divine Nine, but DREF, that's right, but DREF, I always get that. And as a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, it's very important for us to engage the Divine Nine. We even have a faith-based partnership because we understand that although yes, it's common that engaging African American communities in a faith-based setting, but we have to be careful how we describe that because we don't want to assume that that's the one place you go is to the church and to the barbershop. We got to think more inclusive than just the church when we think about faith-based settings. So we've engaged faith-based genomics with Dr. Shaka Cunningham as one of our national partners. And last month, it was just amazing to me that we kicked off a community return event town hall at the African American History Museum in downtown DC to talk about the importance of returning value to populations. And also we have Xavier University. We funded a HBCU, Historically Black College University, as one of our national engagement partners. And the list goes on, even including a new university in Puerto Rico as one of our new partners to engage populations. National Alliance Hispanic Health. And again, the NYU project is led by African American researcher Dr. Stephanie Cook, talking about how do we engage young scientists to get interested in big data, addressing health disparities. But again, the take-home message here is intentionality and also resources to support populations who are historically underrepresented. Even PrideNet is one of our partners, engaging the LGBTQIA+ community. So the frameworks that we use, and we talk about tools that researchers use. I'm trained as a CBPR, but also in implementation science. And so my work used to sit at that intersection of multi-level interventions, not just looking at an individual, but looking at a community or looking at the interpersonal relationship. I did my doctoral work studying the role of community health workers in rural Haiti and how those community health workers, through a task-shifting model, can get more women screened for cervical cancer to address the cervical cancer issue in rural Haiti. That model was informed by what I saw in rural Ethiopia by following around a community health worker in Ethiopia who used a breastfeeding model to encourage women to get screened for cervical cancer. Again, we have to be willing to borrow from other sciences, borrow from other disciplines, and not just assume that our discipline or our particular science, our dissertations have all the answers. So when we adapted this ecological model, I first adapted this model through a lung cancer screening process. When we looked at this, the CDC had this socio-ecological model, looking at interventions at the individual, interpersonal, community, and even culture and society. And one of the things that I found out when I became the Chief Engagement Officer, that a lot of our partners didn't have appropriate metrics to be able to say, how do I measure engagement? How do I define different levels of engagement? So we adapted this model and recently published on it with a paper by Liz Cohn and Ronnie Tepp. And we defined the model in outreach and awareness, and the outreach and awareness really being those big efforts, those large masses efforts where I may not have a large impact, but at least I'm reaching out to populations. These are those large emails. This may be a large newsletter that goes out. Those are impactful and we need to count those. Education and access, if you're measuring education and access, you must be able to say what was the knowledge before or after, what knowledge did I impart on this community. Then enrollment and retention. And then participants as partners and knowledge mobilization. We specifically decided to put knowledge mobilization instead of dissemination because dissemination is often confined to one of three routes: publications and manuscripts, research conferences where we're speaking to our peers, or other keynote talks. That's usually how we disseminate our information from science. I hate to break it to you, but my family I don't think they've attended one of my keynote talks. I don't think they've read any of my publications, and they definitely don't come to the conferences because the registration is too high. So with that, how will my brothers, how will my nephews know what I found out about lung cancer screening and tobacco cessation and the role of stigma and racial discrimination, and how that discrimination gets under the skin to cause an epigenetic change that can put this person at risk for lung cancer, even when their smoking habits may be less than their white male counterpart? How's my community going to get that information? They're not going to read my publication. I even put my publication in our family group chat. Real story, real story. I had an amazing publication come out about some of the work that I've been doing with barbers on the south side of Chicago for lung cancer screening. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I was like, well, my family, they gonna get this one, because it has all the keywords. It has barbers, faith-based, and I grew up Pentecostal, and my mother was Kojic, Church of God in Christ, and my dad was apostolic, so I was like, it got faith in it, I got them. Nothing. And you can see what text they read and they didn't. And so I told my sister, I said, you need to get these people to start reading my work, because when they download it, that means that more people. So I had to explain that to them. But I'm joking, but I'm serious. My family's not even reading my work. So how will we mobilize knowledge? We do it through our partners. We do it through our partners such as American Association of Health and Disability. We talk about outreach and awareness. In 2023, the American Association of Health and Disability helped us reach over 600,000 individuals across the nation through virtual and in-person events, social media, and digital dissemination. They also created a network of 19 disability organizations where they provide seed funding to those organizations to increase access for persons with disabilities. AAHD also hosts regular webinars and disseminates target education materials. AAHD was also instrumental in ensuring that our mobile engagement asset was accessible and ensuring that it met minimum criteria for reaching populations historically underengaged. So that mobile engagement asset, which is our mobile unit that goes around the country to those parts of the US that don't have big academic medical institutions, that don't have those ivory towers that you heard about yesterday that are often a part of the discrimination. These ivory towers are now part of the lack of access, as Dr. Angel talked about yesterday. So we take our show on the road, but in order to, we make sure that that show must be accessible. So we partner with the AAHD and the National Alliance for Hispanic Health, where we collaborated on one event, for example, a 2-week All of Us journey in Bronzeville, Texas, resulted in 150 people creating an account and 98 people fully enrolling. We even have participants as partners. One of our partners, Kelly Rice, who identifies as they, them, is a participant ambassador currently serving as the Director of Aging and Disabilities for Central Catholic Charities and the Diocese of Joliet. Again, participants as partners at the table with us, helping to inform this work. And knowledge mobilization, where AAHD actually provided research training to over 50 health and disparity researchers, telling them how to use our data set to drive the research work that they're doing. And again, I'm going to end with 2 examples of intersectionality research. One of our researchers, Dr. Norma Reed Torres Blasco, who I met on a site visit in Ponce Health University in Puerto Rico. Her project is looking at examining Hispanic and Latinos with coexisting chronic health conditions, mental illness, and social determinants of health. Her research aims to document the interconnections of chronic health and mental illness in Latinos by studying the incidence of chronic health conditions such as cancer, heart disease, and diabetes among those with a history of mental illness. But what's really important about the work that she brings, and this is why diversity, equity, inclusion matters. We say representation matters, but we really need to understand that, because true representation brings the lived experience of multiple people to the work. And we do our work. Our lived experience informs our work. And so this is actually an interview with Dr. Torres Blasco on how her own lived experience with a family member dealing with a chronic condition and mental illness, how that's informing her NIH, hopefully one day NIH funded work. And that QR code can let you see more about her work. Another project that's really been amazing is a work by Dr. Sally Baxter at the University of California in San Diego, looking at understanding how the social determinants of health associated with loss of eye and eye in the United States using the All of Us data set. Dr. Baxter's research is aimed to leverage the All of Us research workbench to improve care for special populations, such as older individuals, individuals with disability, and minoritized groups. Her contribution to the study of glaucoma using the All of Us data set include racial and ethnic disparities, social health care utilization, and even epidemiology factors associated with cannabis use and other things. But again, just some examples of research that would not have been possible with the data set that was not as diverse and as large as ours. So I hope I've given you a snapshot of the All of Us research data set and left some efficient time for us to engage in the Q&A and really a conversation. And thank you all for this opportunity to give you a little snapshot into my world, into my research, and into the All of Us research program. And please give us your feedback on how we can truly make this program the All of Us research program. Because I'm very aware that right now it's some of us, and it really should be all of us. And so our name is not where we are. I say our name is where we're going. Truly to all of us. Thank you all for your time and your engagement today.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. I'm sure many of us are like formulating research questions that we can be doing with the All of Us data set. So to get started with questions, comments, feedback for Dr. Watson.
Thank you so much. I'm Elizabeth Rodas from the University of Kentucky. We do lots of rural work, so I'm excited to talk to you later on offline about that. But this was phenomenal. My mind is just blown on how many different directions we can go and really engage. My question kind of comes from an early career standpoint. From an institutional and even NIH level, we don't always get enough resources or attention for the time and the energy that it takes to go out and to engage communities.
Yep.
Especially thinking about my basic science or bench science counterparts who have lots of money for their microscopes, but for me as a community engaged researcher, not so much. Do you have tools or techniques or strategies that we can do as researchers to engage our institution or include in our NIH grants that can really monetize and allow the resources that are needed to really engage in the community?
That is a great question, and yes, we can talk offline, but some of the tools that I've had is in the budgeting early on. First of all, we need more department heads like Susan and others to understand that our researchers in population health and doing community engaged research, that they need protected time in order to do that. And sometimes I'm not going to put the onus on you as an early stage trainee or early stage investigator. The onus needs to sometimes be on that independent researcher. So I can do things like let you know that you can get a supplement, an administrative supplement on my research project, and that administrative supplement can be written to buy out your time teaching so you can really focus on some of the research that you need to do. I also have conversations with faculty and department heads and institutional leaders about how to use the indirects from those grants. Those indirects should not only, I can't say should as a government, I have to practice this being a government employee and what I can and can't say. So those indirects can be used to think beyond about building. Those indirects can also be used to think about investing in our faculty. And our department chairs can get more savvy in being able to go to that vice chancellor research at the institution and say, can I get 5%, 10% of those indirects back to utilize for faculty engagement? And also our societies, our different professional societies. Society of Behavioral Medicine was one that really invested in me as an early stage investigator and gave me a lot of the space and even resources and training that I needed. So one tool is starting at the organization of professional societies that you're a part of, seeing where resources are there, talking to the department chairs, department heads about what resources, and then also doing an environmental scan to see are there faculty or others in your institution that may have an R or eligible grant for administrative supplement. Administrative supplements are woefully underused in academia. Think about those of us who've gotten R and other big awards. How many of us have really applied for, how many of us have maxed out the admin supplements? My program officer got tired of seeing me coming because I was like, I got a new aim. She's like, Kareem, the grant's not even funded yet. You're trying to get a supplement. Because I had a line of students that needed it. And that's serious.
Good morning. I apologize for being late. I had to take another meeting. I asked a version of this question yesterday, but I think you might be a great person to ask again. As an autistic researcher, it pains me sometimes to apply for grants that mandate the use of medical model language. For example, autism spectrum disorder instead of just autism, because nobody wants to be referenced as disordered.
Yeah.
How can we as outsiders work collaboratively with an advocate like you to start to get more flexibility and more awareness on the part of the grant reviewers that would allow us to use the identity language we prefer?
This is not a hyperbole answer. Your emails and your communications to us as federal employees, they matter. And they don't just go in our inboxes. I tell community members, when you send me that email saying that there was language that wasn't inclusive or language that is not advanced to where we can see the field is, I can then forward that email to the scientific review committee. And this is more than just the email. It is truly the first step in advocacy, because we're public servants and we have to be able to serve the public. And also working with organizations like AAHD to inform them, and then they also have a seat at the table with many of these partners at the NIH that are helping us think about this inclusive language. And we are seeing this happen in the SOGI data, social sexual orientation and gender identity. We are seeing this language change because of the advocacy of organizations like PrideNet and other organizations. So it's not moving as fast, but it is moving. And one of the early recommendation I would say, when you see that language, particularly in an RFA or a grant or publication, copy and paste it, put it in an email and send it to either a program officer or even that person listed at the NIH putting that call for proposal out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Kareem. Thank you so much for your advocacy. I'm wondering whether you think it's ever feasible for NIH to consider a pull mechanism rather than just a push mechanism of saying, hey, those of you who are willing and who know how and who have the desire should go ahead and do authentic engagement in your research. What about an incentive, like the way that grant submissions are scored, or maybe there could be an augmentation to the funding level for a project that demonstrates true engagement plans?
I do think that there's a place for that in the future, but we're not there yet. I'm seeing some positive momentum forward in things like the Common Fund and what it did in a grant opportunity called Compass. Compass was actually grant funding that went directly to community and academic partners, and the person being named in the grant as the contact PI actually had to be the community member. Other ways where I see it's happening, and I see some glimpses of hope, is in our CTSAs, our Clinical and Translational Science Awards, funded by NCATS at the NIH. Those community engagement cores at most CTSAs can do that pull that you're talking about. They can provide seed funding. My first seed funding grant was from a big CTSA through ARC. Jen Brown was here yesterday. ARC ultimately has funding from a CTSA. And so some of that money from ARC and the institutional funding that Northwestern gave actually funded me to do my first faith-based grant with a faith-based partner and an academic researcher. And that was through seed funding. So that pull piece can happen in some entities, but it often happens in your bigger grants like your U mechanisms or your P mechanisms. And sorry for the alphabet soup, but it's important to know where that pull is happening, because it's very not likely going to happen in the RFA, but it's going to happen in some of your larger center grants.
Okay, who's next? Oh. I'm coming. Should have just stayed put.
Thank you. Not a question. I was going to address the prior question. So, Tony Ajishafem from NICHD and CMRR at NIH, and you may have noticed there are notices for funding opportunities that now explicitly would say you need to include a plan to include lived experience. Recently we have an RFA on ableism from NCMR and ICHD, but those applications, when they come in, if they do not include a plan to include lived experience, they're withdrawn automatically. So we would like to see it. Right, the push is hopefully that that extends to the parent announcements like the RO1, but increasingly, if you pay attention to some of the notices coming out of NIH, many of them are now requiring a plan to include lived experience.
Thank you for collaborating on that. I appreciate that.
I really
like that idea of the plan too, because this is, now that community engaged research and inclusion of lived experience is becoming, you know, more common, more talked about, we need to make sure that it extends beyond tokenism. So I think this is really an opportunity for us as OT researchers and people doing authentic community engaged research to make sure that happens.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and hearing all of this amazing work that's being done and all of these systems changes that you just described. I actually am wondering, recently in my recent round of grant submissions to NIH, I actually just took over AIM-1 and just did it. Like said, I'm tired of putting it down below and like adding it as a thing, but like, let's just make it AIM-1. Like, is that a thing? Like, is that something, should I have done that or not? Or do you recommend that?
Well, I can't say what you should have done, but what I can say is going through a strong specific aims page and even utilizing technical assistance webinars prior to the submission of that grant, reaching out to the program officers. Program officers, most of them do not mind, and they are expecting for you to reach out to them. When they're listed, that contact name on that RFA or that notice of funding opportunity, that contact name that is down there, that email is there for a reason. Contact them. I still remember to this day reaching out to Dr. Melissa Green Parker. At the time she was at NHLBI, I didn't know her, but her email was there. And I sent my specific aims page. And then I called her, and she happened to answer. And she was like, I got your email. I'm going through your stuff. And she was like, you trying to do a lot, huh? And I was like, yeah, I'm trying to do a lot. She said, you got about 3 grants in this specific aims page. I never met her before. But just that person on the other end saying, Kareem, you got some good bones here, but this is a 3 grant specific aims page. Think about what is feasible to do within this 4 years and go back and rewrite this specific aims page. I did that and I got the funding on the first round, but it took me getting that feedback and even that guidance. Even in NCI, Dr. Sonia Springfield's shop at the NCI, I'm happy that NCI now has what's called a PED, a Plan to Enhance Diversity. Because another thing that matters, you talked about the research review process. In order to get more diverse, the review process to be more equitable and inclusive, we need more researchers with the lived experience to actually be on the review panels. And the way you get on review panels is by having the NIH BioSketch that puts you as an expert. So we have to think about that pathway. So I'm really excited about what NCI is doing in that plan to enhance diversity. So I hope that answers your question, but if you have specific questions, my email is up there as well.
Who's next? We've been waiting for you. Kicking down doors.
Love you too, Susan. Kalia Johnson from UNC Chapel Hill. Apologies, had to run out. Baby girl is fine. But I don't know if this question was asked. I know we're talking about, you just mentioned diversifying those who review applications, but I'm also, like my mind goes back to publication that I read not too long ago about, race equity work or race equity funding from NIH still going by and large to white scholars predominantly. And so I'm just wondering if you have ideas or your colleagues at NIH have ideas about a fellows program. I'm gonna go ahead and put it out there because I want to be top on the list, to do a lot more like intentional and targeted training of all types so that folks of color, scholars of color who have been doing the work for a very, very long time get a shot at the pot. Yep. If you will.
That's real. One of the things that I saw a lot of promise with in terms of that is the NIH First Awards. Some of you may be aware of these first institutions, but it's one of the ways to think about how do we even engage and to support institutions for recruiting talent and recruiting faculty from diverse groups, from diverse populations, particularly from self-identified minoritized populations? How do we provide resources to recruit them and provide protected time for that research? So that was one thing that I saw that I was really excited about with the first awards. But even also some of the fellowships and the summer training programs that you'll see. As many listservs as you can. I don't want to clog up your inbox, but as many listservs as you can. Go to the institutes and centers that may fund your work, and don't go to just one. Think about multiple institutes and centers that may fund your work, and sign up for their listserv, because they may offer training workshops, summer fellowships. NINR, the National Institute of Nursing Research, just did a social determinants of health summer research fellowship training program to really get scholars the tools that they need and to work on biosketches. So we need to do more of it, and we can talk offline about some of the intentional ways and other connections that I may be able to think about providing. But we need more of that. But I also want to put the onus not just on the NIH, but put the onus on the researcher as well. I started off in cancer disparities research and cancer prevention and control, but as a breast cancer researcher, at first, I understood how my male privilege sometimes played out. And I had to own and acknowledge that. And I had to look at my research team and see, was it reflective of the population I'm studying? So we also have to think about this concept of ally, moving beyond ally, and holding ourselves accountable. You know, you know, it doesn't always have to be a concordant or racially concordant team for everything, but you do have to think about, if I'm studying this population and I'm not a member of this lived experience group, how can I bring to the table a young scholar that I can provide the resources to do this work? You know, I saw a recent project studying Asian Americans, and I was like, maybe the name is different, but I'm not seeing Asian American researchers leading this project. And so we as scholars sometimes have to hold ourselves accountable and ask ourselves the tough question, have I been inclusive? Yes, the funder has to be more inclusive, but have I been intentional and inclusive in designing my research project and bringing on scholars alongside of me as well?